Good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on which side of the world you happen to be on. I'm Michael Burns, and I'm grateful to be able to present here at Tune In, Story and Sound. Before I get started, I just want to begin with a brief acknowledgement that we're keeping in mind and keeping our thoughts and prayers for all of those affected by and fighting the massive wildfires here on the west coast of the United States, because I'm coming to you live from San Francisco, where we're currently not on fire, but we have enough smoke that you would think we are. And also, we want to keep in mind all of those affected by and fighting the coronavirus around the world. We live in challenging times, to be sure, and we need to be grateful, especially to have little moments like these where we can all kind of get together and have a brief respite of enjoyment and a touch of our old reality back from the sort of brutal day-to-day challenges we're all facing today. So if it feels good for you, I'd appreciate if you can make a donation to any of the local organizations in your area that are fighting either the coronavirus or the fires as they happen, because people need help and they're helping us live. So that being said, let's enjoy ourselves. And now, a story. We're going to have a little music with this. This is a little story called Footsteps in the Night. As a young boy, I was more than a bit precocious and was reading by the age of 2. Somehow I developed a bit of a fascination with monsters. I devoured early Japanese kaiju TV shows like Ultraman and Space Giants, and used to watch all the Godzilla movies on Saturday morning. And but what I was really into was dinosaurs. I was fascinated by dinosaurs. I read every book I could find. I memorized all their names. I could spell all their names before I could probably spell my own name. Do not ask me to spell Triceratops right now, because I will probably get it wrong. And I could identify any dinosaur from a picture. I think it was just really fascinating to me that these were real monsters and lived on this earth, you know? And as I got older, in my preteen years, my fascination with dinosaurs kind of passed. But one night I was sitting with my parents watching a television program, and it was about mysterious monsters. And it was a documentary. I believe it was hosted by Peter Graves, and it was all about the Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti and the American Bigfoot, or Sasquatch. I like Sasquatch. It just rolls off the tongue. I say Sasquatch. This just blew my mind, right? Because hey, maybe in fact there were real monsters today somewhere on the earth that we haven't discovered yet. And I remember going on camping trips in the Boy Scouts, and every time I was in the woods, I was always hoping, is this going to be the time that I see a Bigfoot? Is it going to walk into my camp at night, or cross the path in front of me, or pick up Johnny and take him off into the woods, because Johnny was kind of a pain in the ass anyway. And it was always that sense that maybe that could happen. Sadly, the only monsters I ever saw on those camping trips were giant mosquitoes, and the ones that we made up while sitting around the campfire playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons late at night. So as I moved into my adult years, I sort of had left all of this behind. And then I took a trip to Northern California, and everything changed. In the fall of 2008, I was invited to a multi-day event at a friend of mine's property up in northern Mendocino County. And it was he had a few acres up on the side of a mountain, and it was really beautiful. There was forest, there was a beautiful vista that overlooked the canyon between his mountain and the next mountain over. It was really a really wild and beautiful and serene place, largely. And I elected to set up my campsite away from the rest of the group, maybe about 150 meters to the other side of the property, where there was this little sort of a 4-posted structure with a metal roof, and you could set a tent under it. And then straight out in front of that, about 30 meters, there was this amazing vista point where you could see all the way down the canyon either direction. And you could also, you just had sort of pristine woods around there. It was really, really nice and peaceful. And so I set up my camp there that night, and about 10 meters from the front of my tent, there's this Well, there was a path that went right from the front of my tent, and about 10 meters out, it was about 30 meters to the vista point, and about 10 meters out there was a garbage can. And this was one of those ones made from like an old oil drum without the lid on it, which is important. And inside of there was maybe about like a third of a meter's worth of trash, like about this much trash, just kind of loosely stacked in there. Now, that evening, I got into my bedding. I probably was maybe around 11:30 at night, and it had been a long and fun day, and we'd been around a campfire and singing and doing all sorts of fun things. And I got into bed and nodded off to sleep, and it was just all very serene and quiet. And then I woke up at about 2:30 or so in the morning. It's still like kind of fuzzy what time that was, and I heard something walking, and this woke me up. And it was something that sounded very large, making heavy footprints, and coming from my feet were facing the front door of the tent, so it was coming from my right and going to my left. And it seemed like it was probably out roughly as far as the garbage can, maybe 10, 12 meters away. Now, my first thought was, oh shit, it's a bear. Now, because there were bears up there, and I was not anyway prepared to deal with a bear, but I figured, well, if it was a bear, hopefully it's come for the garbage can and, maybe my picnic basket. It's a Yogi Bear joke for you Yogi Bear aficionados. And as I listened to it, I realized that it was very clearly not a bear, because what was walking was bipedal, and it was very clearly making the footsteps that a person would, walking one step, then one step, then one step, and it was not the larger shuffling sound that a bear would make. This kind of freaked me out, and then I got the thought, I was like, is this what I think it could be? Now, it could have been, some transient or somebody else from the camp playing a gag on me, but there was nobody that big that would sound that heavy going through the woods. So my plan was to quietly get up out of bed and unzip the front of the tent just a little to get my eye through the hole so I could see if this was, in fact, the thing that I thought it might be. And when I went to move, that's when I realized I was paralyzed. I could not move at all. I could not move a muscle. I could not move my toe. I could not move my mouth. I could not roll my head from side to side. In fact, I was actually drooling a little bit. Then I went from being excited to being freaked out and a bit scared, because suddenly I'm in this position where, for some reason, I'm paralyzed. I'm in the woods. I'm far away from everybody else. It's the middle of the freaking night. There's some really big thing outside my tent. I don't know what it is, and I can't get up to see it. So, as you can imagine, I feel a little vulnerable right now. So, whatever it was gets to about the point where I believe the garbage can is walking, and then it stops. And it's silent. Dead silent. And then this was probably the longest silence I've ever heard in my life. Even though it was, in reality, maybe like 10 seconds, it could have been 10 hours. Because I was frozen. I did not know what was going to happen. I could not see, I could not hear, I could not move. And something was out there, and I did not know what it was. Then, after what seemed like an interminable amount of time, I heard some sort of like ruffling around as if something was maybe in the garbage can. Then a brief silence. And then whatever it was, walking away slowly off the other direction to my left. About 20 minutes later, suddenly I could wiggle my fingers and toes, and I could move about again. And at this point, I thought, well, I should get up and maybe go see what it was. And I was able to move, and I grabbed my flashlight, and I grabbed my small pocket knife. And as I went to get up, I realized I'm in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. Nobody knows where I'm at. All I've got is a small pocket knife and a torch. And I don't know what's going to happen out there. It would probably be safer if I stayed in bed. So that's where I stayed. In the morning, I got up and I walked outside and looked around the area, and I did not see any large footprints, or there wasn't a sign that said Sasquatch was here on any of the bushes. But what I did notice was something very interesting. All of the garbage had been carefully removed from the garbage can and set on the ground next to it. Now, if it was a bear would have simply knocked the can over and gone nuts with whatever's inside of it. Whatever got into there, now this was about a meter plus high can, about 4 feet American. right? So whatever it was would have had to have very long arms, would have had to bend over, reach down with those very long arms, and pick the things up out of the can and set it on the ground next to it. This is weird, right? So there's only a few things that could have done that, and I didn't think there were any basketball players on the loose in the woods in Mendocino at that particular time. I walked around the rest of the area and found some spots where it looked like some branches had been knocked away and moved as if something large had passed through, but I didn't fully go exploring because, I had sort of a social event to be at. But I pulled aside the owner of the property later and I told my friend what happened, and he looks around quietly to make sure that nobody's listening to us, and he says, "I've talked to the neighbors. They're up here. They're up here." So, yeah, that was that. And I still did not know really ultimately what had happened. However, 7 years later, in 2015, I was living in Los Angeles, and I had the good fortune to work as a story producer on a documentary series about people who had terrifying encounters with monsters. The same type of program that had piqued my interest in this originally. And as part of my job, I had to interview various people. And one time I had the opportunity, as part of my job, to interview a well-known Sasquatch expert from Texas. And he was a really friendly guy, and we got along great. And at the end of the official interview, I said, "Hey, Jeff, do you mind if I ask you to hear out my story and give me some feedback on it? Because I've really never explained this to people before." And he was very gracious and said, "Sure, I'd love to hear it." And so I told him the story. And at the end of it, he says, "Michael, what you just told me is a very common thing, especially the part about the paralysis." Wow, because I thought I was having a panic attack or something. Then he says, "We think it's one of two things. It may be a chemical reaction to a pheromone that the Sasquatch releases when they go by, and they cover it up with the foul smell that people report, and that may cause paralysis. But what we think is more likely is that it's infrasound." Now, infrasound is sound at ultra-low frequencies below what humans can hear, and it can have all sorts of physiological and even psychological effects on people and on animals. And he says to me, tigers use infrasound to stun their prey. Now, I had no idea about any of this. He says when a tiger roars, it emits infrasound as it roars. So basically, if you're in the jungle and a tiger pops out of the bush and roars at you, you ain't running anywhere because you will be stunned in place by the infrasound. At the same time, you're probably in shock that a tiger just jumped out of the bush, and by the time you realize what happened, the tiger is on you, and goodbye, you're tiger bait. So he says that we think the Sasquatch use infrasound as a defense mechanism and then as a way to communicate with each other. So my mind was super, super blown then, because it explained so much. It explained why I couldn't get off my air mattress to see something that I'd always wanted to see, because that thing had decided it didn't want me to see it and used a defense mechanism to stop. I was stunned. I was just filled with like a sense of wonder that something like this could be real and that it could have prevented me from seeing it in the first place. And now, whether I believe that is what happened is not really the point. Whether I believe that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, any of these things are real are also not the point. But the point is millions and millions of people do. Does that make them real? So why do people believe in monsters? With creatures like dinosaurs or giant squids, I think the answer is obvious. Like, these things may lurk in the distant past or in deep, dark water, but they also live in the daylight, the consensus of reality that we all agree on. They live in museums, textbooks, encyclopedias. We all agree that this exists, right? But something like a Bigfoot, that's a less straightforward sort of a question. There's a possibility that participating in a chain of discovering something like a Bigfoot might be open to you, finding a new species, right? This is why this is interesting and you believe in it. There is a contrarian spite about believing in a Bigfoot. You know, you're getting back at Neil deGrasse Tyson or that arrogant bio teacher you had in 7th grade, right? But I think above all, there's this sheer joy, this joy of hope, the hope that the world may yet hold many, many undiscovered things as the things that we can name already. And in some way, this sense of the fantastic can become part of our largely humdrum lives in the same way it was when we were children. Back before the world was thoroughly mapped and cataloged, the far away was inherently tinged with the fantastic. On the edge of ancient maps, monsters were marked there. These were the places that were the known shaded into the speculative. This is where now we need to set our sights toward, because in the deepest tropical jungle, a dinosaur may still be lurking. In an undiscovered ocean, something scaly and wondrous may be swimming below the surface. And in a dark forest at the end of known lands, something big is making footsteps in the night. The question is, are you ready to go find it? Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the show.